Next level. Next level.
Evet.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Aspen City Council work session for March 4th, 2024. We have a couple items on our agenda for this evening. We have a work session discussion around heat tape, outdoor heating, and application of renewable energy mitigation program. We have an Aspen City Charter reading and discussion, and a brief conversation on City Council norms and working agreements. We will start with our first item, which is the heat tape and outdoor heating. Ben, are you introducing this one?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Council, for the record, Ben Anderson with Community Development. Joined at the table are Bonnie, Justin, and Dennis, kind of a big part of our building team who were at the heart of the effort to update the building codes to the 2021 with Aspen local amendments. The two topics that we're here to talk with you about this evening are a result of the 2021 adoption and some of the changes that we made within that adoption, particularly as it relates to the rent program. One of the topics, outdoor heating related to restaurant use, I think staff came to an understanding of what council was intending to see with the adoption, and I think are struggling with the realities in our downtown core, particularly with the use of outdoor heaters, particularly by restaurants. And then on heat tape, again, the code, I think, reflects exactly what council desired. But we've heard some concerns from commercial applicants for, particularly in the replacement of existing heat tape systems, that are raising some questions. So we're here to talk about that this evening with you. At the end of the discussion, there is direction that we'd like to see from council. We don't need to this evening get into, the weeds. We can get into that when we come back with a proposal for how to respond to those things. But the direction this evening is essential to staff. Should council desire changes to our existing program on either one of these topics, we'll go away with that direction and come back with specific potential code changes for your consideration at a later date, likely sometime this summer. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Bonnie and her team. We're happy to, answer any of your questions, engage in discussion, but at the end of this, we would like some direction about whether or not you would like us to pursue some changes in these areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Mr. Mayor, permission to share my screen?
Yes, please.
I don't know how to get this to go there.
To the bottom right, isn't it?
Click on that little guy right there. See what that does. There we go. Did that do it? No? Go back to you're going to have to get out of there. I'm sorry. Go to stop sharing, pause share, or new share. See the way that this does that. I think you're just.
Councilors, while we're going through that technical difficulty, just wanted to share with you from my view of Wagner Park these past 3 nights. I think it was a much stronger activation than what we had in past World Cup years. What was happening there, it was still a sponsors village, but I would say the sponsorship was definitely downplayed compared to last year. So I think that it's really appreciative SCICO heard the feedback that you gave and executed on it. So I'm sure we'll have a more formal discussion, but I just wanted to share with you from my lens, from being out there, that it looked a lot better than what we'd experienced previously.
Thanks for the report on that.
Is it not responding? So stop sharing. Click on stop share. And then go back into PowerPoint. Click on share. And then hit escape. And then, that's going to do the same thing. You're just going to have to click on the individual slides.
There's Word.
So click on that, and then when you get on there, you're just going to individually click on, hopefully.
Hi, Ward, just want to let you know we see you,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and now we hear you.
Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Are you sharing from network, or do you have a hard copy on your system?
This is on my system.
Okay.
Is it not?
It's not advancing.
Okay.
Try to share your screen.
And can you get started with what you have while Justin sees if he can figure out the back end of it, perhaps? That'd be great.
So I'll start with just some history on the REMP program, Renewable Energy Mitigation. This began in Aspen and Pickens County in 1999 and was the first program of its kind to attempt to mitigate exterior energy use through renewable energy. It went after things like snowmelt, pools, spas, and that exterior energy usage was offset through either PV on site, some solar thermal hot water, and was primarily targeted at residential usage. That then expanded in 2011 to include commercial as well. So now our program targets both residential and commercial usage. We made some big overhauls to our building and
Bonnie, hold up a second. Do me a favor. We're gonna, sorry for the delay. Could you get out of stop sharing, go to your PowerPoint, go file save as, PC. No. Why is it not? Why is it not?
Just checking if you're connected to network, and you are.
and this is on my hard drive.
Sorry,
It's not
Bonnie.
coming.
Let me see something here. Apologies. Why isn't a PDF coming up? I want it to be a PDF and it's not giving me that option. This is very strange.
Print video.
It's
What was the issue with the screen? Did it just not go full screen? Did you still have movability with it?
It's,
It's
No,
totally
it's
frozen. You
frozen.
couldn't you operate. Okay. I think we're gonna want to use their presentation, so if we can't get that up soon, then we could move to our next item and come back.
it turned into a PowerPoint, turned into a blue beam. Okay, and go up here, go back to the session on Zoom.
I don't know if I'm still there.
Be over there. Did we lose the connection? Oh, for crying out loud. No, it doesn't like the hardwire.
We can troubleshoot and
What's that?
keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. I don't know what the concern is. There's a fundamental problem here. We'll be right with you. Or you guys can move on.
So we should move to our next item and give you guys some time? Okay. All right. All right, guys.
All right, we will move forward. The second item on the agenda this evening is a request of council to do a reading of the city charter and have a discussion about it. My recommendation to you is not spend more than an hour on it today, and it's okay if we don't get through the entire charter in this time period, and we can schedule additional time in the future if that's the desire of council. I want to just give you some context of what charters are and why they exist. Not all states allow municipalities to have a home rule charter. So a home rule charter is like a city constitution and how the government is set up and operates. And when there's not a home rule charter, there's what's called a Dillon state or a statutory state. Now in Colorado, you can be a statutory municipality or a home rule municipality. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but I guess it's probably 50-50. I don't know. I was looking. Jen knew. She doesn't know. Okay. This is really the context of a constitutional amendment that happened in Colorado in the late 60s, early 70s, to allow more local choice and decision-making about how communities run through a home rule charter option. Most mountain towns immediately accepted that to separate itself from the statutory requirements of the state on a lot of governance matters. Here in Aspen in 1970, late 69, early 70, there was what's called a charter congress. I believe that's what they refer to themselves as in the historical record, which in essence is that there was a group appointed to review and create a charter for the city of Aspen. It was approved by voters in 1970 and is substantially now in the same form as when it was passed in 1970 and became effective in 1971. What you have seen is amendments over time to certain sections, and most of those amendments are through citizen petition, which in turn council placed on the ballot once that citizen petition was validated. On occasion, City Council has also proposed to the voters questions for amendments on the charter. The last one I can recall City Council proposed had to do with franchise fees and utilities. That ballot measure failed back in fall of 17, I think. Maybe fall of 18, I can't remember which one it was. So in essence, as a foundational document, it tells us a lot about how really all of us sitting at this table, what our respective jobs are and duties that we're expected to carry out for the community. And my intent really with just framing things up this way is saying that today's intent is to to review it, talk about it. The staff's not bringing forward any recommendations for you on this matter. We just felt like the starting point was really council having some conversation with each other. We've provided you a number of examples of very modern charters that have been passed in the last 5 years. We felt Fort Collins was an example of a very detailed charter that's also more prescriptive than the Aspen charter. We have tons of charter examples in our collection here at the city and working with our other colleagues for here in the state. So we are happy to bring you any more examples that you would like to see. I do want to say is that I knowingly put only charters that show the council manager form of government in your packet. I'm happy to bring you strong mayor examples if you want. There's only 3 or 4 municipalities in the state of Colorado that utilize the strong mayor form of government. Those are places like Denver, Colorado Springs, Pueblo. And so it's much less common in how local governments operate in this area. But happy to talk with you about the differences between those 2 forms if you want more information as well. So Diane and I are going to light touch facilitate this for you tonight. And then we have 2 scribes with us who are going to keep notes on maybe questions we can't answer here, things that need legal review to give you solid answers on, or not tell you we can't answer it because maybe there's a lack of clarity in the charter around that issue. And then certainly at any point you want to give us direction about whether you want to continue spending time doing this or looking at any different approaches to reviewing this document, we're certainly open to those along the way. Sound good?
Thank you.
I have a few preliminary questions, if that's okay.
I am going to let the mayor handle
Sure.
calling on people.
Yeah,
Thanks.
go right ahead.
Thanks. Firstly, is there a conflict of interest? Is there an inherent conflict of interest in having council members sort of handle this, or is it better handled by a charter review committee or Congress, whatever that term was that you used previously?
Sure. So Charter Review Commission is the more common language. It is not a conflict from my seat. He might have a different opinion from a legal lens. Most often, there's actually a sitting council member on our Charter Review Commission.
I do not think there's any conflict. City Council clearly has the authority to propose charter amendments. It could go through every word and amend it, and it has that authority. There's no conflict. It is a common procedure, and I believe we called it a charter convention back in 1970. But you could clearly appoint one to, or a commission or a committee or whatever to review the charter. That's very common to update it.
Thanks. That's something I'd like to explore, but I wanted to ask that question out loud just to make sure that everyone understood that. Secondly, I know, Sarah, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think it'd benefit everyone from hearing it. I don't know if you're prepared to answer this now or not, but could you hit on maybe like the 3 or 4 biggest items in the charter that you and staff feel need attention and need revisiting? And again, if you want to do that at a later time.
I'll do it at a very high level. We're very interested in talking about the article for elections with you. We have a white paper that we've prepared about the pros and cons of how we've been doing elections the last 50 years versus a very changed environment for election security that we're in today, and the pros and cons of that. We also touch on the pros and cons of different election timing, on what it does for potential candidacy for office, that we're not prepared to present that white paper tonight, but we would certainly welcome the opportunity to bring that back to you. I would say I think the utilities section is a bit out of date. Jim and I haven't talked about that one too much, but we think that, I do question if it actually even needs to be in the charter. And that would be a great debate for other people to have. I think there's a few other areas where I just view the charter, one section of the charter conflicts with another, and when it comes to the day-to-day application, and we have to work our way through that in situations that the charter didn't contemplate 50 years ago, that are just with the modernization of the community and technology and so on. But yeah, I did not come tonight prepared making any recommendations to you.
No, understood. I just wanted to identify the key issues. I think those are my 2 things right now. Thanks very much.
Thanks. So We'd like to, like I said, spend about an hour, if we even need to do that much on today. Our goal is to get through several articles here. If we could get through the first three, that'd probably be a good start for us on this. My question to individual council members, have you reviewed the charter? You looked through this a little bit?
A little bit.
Okay. You know, the charter is really the framework. And so some items that are appropriate for sitting in a charter are not found other places. Things that are found other places may not be appropriate for charter. So just to go through this real quickly, we'll go through kind of page by page, article by article, and just see if there's any questions around any of different sections. Obviously, the prefatory synopsis and the preamble that start this off are just giving some of that background information around why the charter is in place, how it got there, and then the very basics of the form of government on those first couple pages. Is there any information in those items alone that council members have questions on? So as we go to Article 1, again, and we're just looking through this, if you're following along together, then as you go through Section 1, there's only 4 sections in Article 1. Again, biggest thing to maybe touch on here is item number 3, 1.3, which is form of government. Council manager government is kind of what you find most often. It is the current form that we have here. As Sarah was saying, there are some other structures that are out there. The one that she brought up by name specifically is to have a stronger mayor position or a mayor strong position. And as she points out, that's really only done in certain larger municipalities, oftentimes because it requires full-time compensation, full-time work, and the role is a little bit different. So I don't think that there's necessarily much to talk about there unless anybody else has questions or comments around form of government. Which brings us to Article 2, elections. As Sarah just said, there's already been discussion around possible election date changes. For those of you that remember, our elections used to be held in May, with a runoff being in June, and swearing in of new members in June as well. That got changed, I forget what year, but I guess it's about 3 cycles ago, so maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago?
It was changed in 2018 to be the current file in December for a March election.
So only 6 years ago, so only a couple cycles ago, that had changed to a March election. As you see, this is called out in section 2.2 under elections, where it is delineated about those dates. That conversation will come back to us with this white paper. I think the consideration that I've heard in the community is for moving either from March back to May, or the possibility of a November election. And there are different facets and ramifications of those that'll come back to us in a white paper. Do council members have any comments on that?
Look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, interested in that. One sort of general question is this charter document as amended? Is it presented as amended? So under the prefatory synopsis, it talks about a 7-member council.
Yeah.
Why is that in there if this is as amended?
Well,
Because that section has not been approved for amendment.
the prefatory synopsis was probably never
Never
proposed
updated.
to be amended. The section regarding the number was amended
Okay, I
in
just wanna make sure-
1980 something.
Make sure I'm looking at the right thing.
Yeah.
Great. And then, Tori, I'm sorry, I didn't respond to you when you asked about the form of government.
Yep.
I think I understand why strong mayor may not be appropriate for Aspen, but I am interested in learning about this concept of a rotating mayor. which exists in some other places. I don't know what the appropriate schedule for it is, but I would like to learn a little bit about that and how that might work or not work for Aspen.
And that would be great under section 3.3, where the duties of the mayor is reviewed too, in conjunction with the election process. There's 2 places in the charter that touch this.
Thanks.
Ward?
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the elections, we've gone back and forth a couple of times on the dates of elections, and a few years ago, we had a discussion about online voting, and we had members from the Secretary of State, Dwight Shellman III, who worked with us for rewriting our election code back somewhere around 15, suggested that the best turnout is in November. I know what the arguments are for and against, but just to throw that out, that he thought that the best chance of the best turnout was November election. And as far as the rotating mayor, since the mayor is elected separately, that might be a charter change to change the way that the mayor is selected. I know Glenwood Springs has, they elect their own mayor from the city council, and there's a rotating chairman of BOCC, but I think that requires a charter change to go from directly electing the mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Ward. Any other comments on these sections or input on forthcoming white paper around elections?
I guess I'll say that I'm very uncertain at this time. I always like the turnout to be high in like November, but I do feel afraid that the municipal election would be overshadowed by everything else, and that is my biggest fear on that one. So I look forward to the white paper and thinking about this more deeply.
All right. Runoff elections at the end of section 2. The voting procedures such as runoff elections was also something that over the last 2 decades has changed. We tried a IRV, instant runoff voting, I believe, a couple cycles ago, again, maybe 12 or 2009, thank you. And so is this an area where council members have any concerns or questions around the style of election process we use?
I'd be interested in exploring. I'm not sure I ever understood runoff. I don't, with such small races, I don't know why absolute numbers don't dictate the results the first time around. So I'm not sophisticated in terms of election processes, but.
Bill, if you're interested in that, the state of Maine has gone to rank voting for the whole state. It started with Portland, Maine, about the time that Aspen had it, but that would be a good place to start to understand what the thoughts are behind it.
Are you talking about like an instant runoff version, or are you just questioning runoffs, period?
I'm not sure I understand the differences, to be honest. Like, to me, it seems like it should be if someone gets 2 votes and the other person gets 1 vote, the winner is the one who has 2 votes. I mean, I think the most simple, basic election makes sense here, but I don't really understand the reasoning behind these other methodologies.
I always thought the reasoning was so that you couldn't win with like 20% of the vote, so you couldn't like divide and conquer with like very little support, was the idea.
Theoretically, that's the point. If you have 3 people and one person has 1 vote and one person has, well, 3 doesn't work, but if you have a lot less than a majority of the votes and you win by a plurality of 21%, is that the best form of an election? And that's the criticism of having a process that doesn't have a runoff.
But we've also had issues with instant runoff and ranked choice voting.
Well, we did an instant runoff, which is, I think, same as a ranked choice. We did instant runoff in 2009. There's a lot of criticism of it. I was heavily involved, and I thought it worked fine. And it just avoids the the runoff process, the runoff's instant. It was difficult for us because we have 2 seats that are being elected from council, and it was a little different than your normal instant runoff situation. I would note that Mayor Tory was elected to the council in an instant runoff election, but
And I
just,
opposed it, not my election, but instant runoff voting.
it was an interesting process, and it was a difficult process. It had a lot of criticism, but I still would say that it worked as intended.
There are a lot of countries around the world that do use runoff elections for parliament, for executive offices. So it's not an uncommon form of election.
I would note that the Oscars this Sunday, the Best Picture is produced through an instant runoff system.
Well, not something I want to spend a ton of time on. But if there's a recommendation in your white paper on something different, I'd be interested in reading about it. But if the consensus is that what we have is fine and working for us, I'm fine with that too.
So we can bring back a bit of information in the white paper. The white paper intentionally is written rather neutral, so it's not tainted with staff's individual opinions in it. So just to forewarn, we present pros and cons. We don't present recommendations in the paper at this point.
Great, but I guess what would be helpful while still staying neutral is, I'm making this up, but Aspen's the only community in Colorado that uses this form of runoff voting. Like, I'd like to know that if that's true.
Sure, why don't we provide multiple examples of how runoffs occur, and then you have that knowledge to decide if there's anything you want to investigate further.
Can we also explore ranked choice voting, just in pros and cons of it, and then?
We will probably do a literature gathering for you rather than writing one specific for the Aspen context, because there's a lot of literature out there that I think explains it and the pros and cons better than us rewriting it.
I would agree with that. It's not significantly different than the instant runoff voting. It's still a problem when you're electing two people at large in one election.
Then last question, can you have a different system for the mayor's race versus the council race? Because,
Absolutely.
it might make more sense in the mayor's race to have ranked choice voting or something.
It was very simple in the mayor's race in 2009. It was very complicated in the council race. You could definitely have that different systems.
Thank you.
All right, so it sounds like we need to bring you back some additional information, that white paper. We were not planning on pushing this hard before you, so that there wasn't pressure to be thinking about this November, because you have to make those decisions by end of August. But we'll schedule still some time in summer to dive into that white paper further, and letting you all decide when that should go out for community conversation before any type of ballot language could or couldn't be written in this area. We think it needs to be a pretty robust community involvement process if the council contemplates changing the election process.
Agreed. Just one other point on this while we're on the topic. One of the things that I saw that was a negative for me against the instant runoff voting was that in a contested race of multiple candidates, and if it is close, having a runoff election affords the electorate the chance to fill that last seat in a way that they see makes up the best council mix. With ranked choice voting, what you get is what you get. So it's it just for me was an advantage for the community to be able to revisit that election of that last seat in a runoff election. Just one of the positives that I saw. The other negative that I saw was that there were people that were bullet voting, so they would vote for just one choice because they didn't want to take the chances of giving somebody more points or working against somebody in an unknown atmosphere of instant runoff voting. So there were just a couple negatives around it for me, but for others, those were things that they weren't concerned with.
The last thing, Mr. Mayor, I'd just say in this section is the election commission, and that we'd be hopeful that there's some conversation and consideration of that in tandem if you're changing anything about the elections. This is a really important commission that certifies election results, but you also want to ensure you have qualified people serving in these roles who have a strong understanding of elections overall, and then specifically Aspen's elections charter provisions and ordinance provisions.
What's interesting in this section around the commission is that it is to be appointed in the July following the municipal election, and that they serve for a 2-year term. That's kind of interesting that, you know, we finish an election cycle, appoint the next 2 for the next election cycle. I understand why it's done that way, but it's just it's a funky process because of their roles and duties. And then the other thing I would say is we just recently, a couple months ago, I believe we appointed somebody to, more than a couple months, but we appointed a new member to the election commission. We were sitting with 2, I believe. Well, it's the clerk and 2 others, right?
Correct, there are only 3 members. Right before the last election, there was some trouble having participation by one of the existing members, and council appointed Gail Nichols, former district court judge, as a member of the election commission. Obviously a very qualified individual who resided in the city for a long time, and as I've noted, served as district court judge here for a number of years. I don't remember if you've reappointed her, and David Hyman was the other election commission member that's been serving for a while in that capacity.
Where do we sit with them now? In July, in last July, did we re-up those 2?
I'm trying to recall. I don't think so either.
I don't think so either.
I don't think
We should do that.
So maybe we'll visit that sooner than later.
A question about that, when the election date was changed, was the date of the appointment of the election commission changed to have the same gap between taking of office and being appointed?
That was not part of the change. So 2.4 that addresses election commissions was not modified to change the date of their appointment.
That, it appears that that's the original language from 1971 voter approval.
Yeah, I served on election commission quite a few years ago for 3 years, and it's a really, anybody out there, be a great place to get involved, but David Hyman has been on for a very long time, and very grateful for his contributions and same with him, with our new member. Thank you.
We can go down through section 2 still. The last, Article 2, section 2.7, runoff elections is down there. We've already talked about that a little bit for requests for more information around different types of voting process. So if there's no question on Article 2, we'll move to Article 3. This is talking about council and the mayor, and powers of council, qualifications. Obviously, with if there's discussion to be had about the council and the mayor and being a rotating seat or not being elected separately, or a different process, runoff versus non-runoff methods for the mayor's seat, those would have some bearing on these sections. So we're calling for a little bit more information. I'll just say that here, oftentimes I get asked about the 2-year term for the mayor's seat, and so many people say, "Oh, that's just so short. Like, how do you get anything done?" And things like that, and they ask, what's my opinion, whether I thought there should be a longer term. And, for me, I don't think the city of Aspen and the electorate really want to vote in a mayor for 4-year terms. You know, one of the things that it says in the beginning of this charter, I think it's in the beginning, it talks about being responsive to the electorate, and so I think that the 2-year term of a lot of the processes around our elections and our current council and mayor's seats are really about that, being responsive and representing the community. So just to throw it out there, I've been asked many times about the 2-year term for the seat of mayor, and for me, I see it as something that, while it may be a little bit cumbersome, I think it works for the city of Aspen and the electorate.
Mr. Mayor, I could point out also that originally, as I understand it, originally that was intended to make certain that a majority of council was up for election each election. So you have 2 council members and a mayor running. So you would have that majority up for election.
And I would say the jury's out about how impactful that is, positive and negative. Because you have a majority turnover on your council every 2 years. You're going to have potentially less clarity in the policy direction of the community. That's just my lived experience of it. Certainly there's other views on it. I do think that if the council, what I've heard is one councilor asking us to bring back information about how would a rotating mayoral seat look. And if there's 3 of you that want us to do that, we'll certainly provide you that information and some examples of, as I said, of the language, for example, from Glenwood Springs, the county commissioners. There's a couple other places to pull where they do 4-year elections, but have that leadership have to be a nomination process on an annual or biannual cycle.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to advocate for the position. I was just expressing the intent.
No worries, no worries.
Any comments, Ward?
Yeah, I don't want to see us visiting a rotating mayor would require changing our elections. I don't think it's broken. So every 2 years, somebody can challenge the mayor. If the mayor's done a poor job, they won't get reelected. If they have done an acceptable or exemplary job, they will be reelected. And I think that every 2 years is appropriate, so I don't want to visit that.
Thank you. I'm always interested in information, but I don't anticipate wanting to see a move towards that change, but I'm always willing to read and learn, so.
I would echo that response. More information the better, but I think if it's not broken, why are we looking at changing it?
We'll hear more back about it.
You on another section 3 comment?
Yep, section 3.
Would be 3.6, I would be interested in understanding how our council and mayoral compensation compares to other similar communities.
Will I answer that right now? It's the highest.
It's one of the highest, but we'll be happy to provide you that ordinance and do a survey of the other mountain towns to see where they're at.
Thanks.
Going through Article 3, around vacancies.
So
I'd like a
this,
point of clarification or have clarity on this. On a vacancy, seems to me the city council has a choice to fill that vacancy, and if they don't within 30 days, then it goes to an election, a regularly scheduled election or a special election. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, that is correct. This was done to avoid the possibility of having some council rolling dice or drawing lots to determine filling a vacancy in that 2-2 split. You may recall that this came about following that circumstance.
Some of the other things you're likely to see in this area of a charter is, for example, compensation requires attendance at public meetings. Believe it or not, there's people who get elected that never show up, or show up rarely, but are still fully compensated. And that would be your case here in the city of Aspen with the way your charter reads. If someone chose to make that tendency to not be available for public meetings. The other thing I would say also in this section is typically there is some clarity around attendance requirements. So it's not just the compensation piece, but what's the process for being excused versus unexcused from public meetings? And that's a common provision of which then provides clarity for the council in its operations for ensuring quorum.
And that is often found in charter language?
Yeah, I've seen it a lot in charters. Here, clearly this charter doesn't have it. I don't think in the early 70s they were contemplating that people would run for office and then fail to perform their duties. But it has become one of the more common things in newer charters to have a provision about how that's addressed. Obviously, recall is the ultimate address of those kinds of behaviors, but usually those expectations have been set out in a charter document rather than in council. Like a council policy or procedure would say, like, how are we going to do the check-in about whether it's excused or unexcused? But the charter would say something about, like, if you don't attend X number of meetings within a certain time frame, then there's some kind of action that the rest of council is able to take. It could be a public sanctioning, it could be, they're not, you don't have the authority to remove any one of you as an individual from the governing body, but it's a commonplace item I've seen in charters over the last 10 years.
How about a public flogging or spanking? That be acceptable?
I think we have a verbal version of that happens from time to time.
Watch Parks and Rec and you can see something like that.
I'm curious if the rest of the council has any interest in changing filling of a vacancy to be strictly from an election instead of having a council appoint, a 30-day to appoint. Just curious what the rest of the council feels about that.
Not sure. Can you repeat the question, Ward? I'm not sure.
So if you see in section 3.8 with the vacancies, the process for it, let's say somebody resigns, the remaining council members can choose to appoint somebody and must do that within 30 days. But that council also has the opportunity to not make an appointment and send it to an election. It would fall in either a special election or the next coming, whether it's county or city municipal, or I think they even denote federal in here or whatever. So the next time that the electorate goes to the polls, unless that's far away, in which case a special election would be sooner and more timely, it calls for that to be employed. And Ward is saying, hey, let's just take out the part where council can appoint somebody and it should just be done by election.
I don't feel a need for changes in that provision.
I think this is how Ruth Kruger was put on council. I look at the plaque over there and she was there for a few months, right?
Dwayne.
Oh, Dwayne was initially appointed?
This was not, Ruth Kruger was appointed.
Yeah.
This happened when there was a application, it was Howie Mallory and, was it Dwayne? I thought it was Dwayne's resignation actually, and I can't remember who was actually appointed. Right. I don't think it was Ruth, but I'm having trouble remembering. But there was a split in council. Council couldn't make a decision. It was 2-2. And there was, the charter at the time required rolling die. And it was would have been selected through that. And one council member eventually decided to change his vote and not go through that process. And after that, we did this process, or we created this process, I should say. And it gives council the option to go right to an election or appoint. And there are pluses and minuses to doing either one of them. And it kind of could depend on how soon the election is and whether you wanted to have to have a special election.
I guess the one comment I will make is, I wouldn't make any changes, except I would potentially look into that the person appointed doesn't necessarily get to finish to the end of term, but until the next municipal election. Meaning that if somebody left and they had 3 years left on their term, they'd have to be in that next election and not get 3 full years. That's something I'd be interested in.
Just to comment on that, Sam, it would throw the whole, it's a possibility that it could throw the whole balance we have now of a majority being elected every 3. You could wind up with 4 people being elected 1 year.
I'll make it clear that it'd be a 2-year term for whoever got that seat. So they'd have to run again in 2 years as a council seat or something like that. So it would get back to normal afterwards, but yeah.
That wouldn't be unusual that somebody simply serve, if it's 3 years, they serve a year, have to go through an election that would only be 2 years.
Yeah.
That would be how to address your issue, Ward. It could be done. In fact, I don't think it's unusual.
Yeah.
Does the council wish for us to bring back a little bit more examples around how vacancies are appointed in other charters?
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll take the information. Once again, this is the kind of thing that that would be included in public outreach before we would do anything like that. But I would love the information.
Ward, where are
Yes,
you?
and I like that idea. I'd like to see some more information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Other Article 3 items for anybody here? You have, that was going over vacancies, oath of office, term limits. Term limits, there was also some changes made to term limits in that package of charter changes that came about. Most notable here, I think, is really that there was a prohibition to serve more than 14 consecutive years in the offices of mayor and city council. I think that was the big
15
change
years.
to this section.
Yes, it was designed to have, or allow somebody to be on, as mayor, move to council, council move to mayor. What was chosen and advocated was that there be 14 years limitation for consecutive service. If you've reached 14 years, you have to sit out 4.
And I was glad to reread this because I originally thought that language was 14 total years,
It is.
not consecutive. That's
14 consecutive.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you have a 4-year sit out, so in case of your earlier elections to your 2018 election, you had more than 4 years in that gap. So someone, yes, could serve 14, sit out for 4, and come back for another 14.
Yes.
I think the question here for council members is just the generality of term limits. Is term limits something that you support, or are term limits something that you don't support? That would be kind of section 310. That's the big question for you.
Strongly support, and the only thing that I'd consider changing is 14 total years as opposed to consecutive.
Ward, what's your generality around term limits?
Well, when we had this discussion, when we enacted this, I was supportive of term limits. And I know, Tori, I think you were mayor, you were on council, and you were not supportive of it. I think that 14 years consecutive is a good idea. 2 or 4 years off it before coming back on, but I think it's a good idea. Anybody that's been on for 14 years deserves a little bit of time off.
Needs to take 4 years off.
I'd like to add to that, though. At the same time, if we have a leader that's served 14 years and is well-regarded, and they take 2 to 4 years off, I think this system actually works pretty well because, like Rachel Richards, She was an effective leader, and she did, reached her limit here, went to the county, and then came back. And the people voted her back in because she was an effective leader. So I think our system works pretty well at this point. But, yeah, I might be interested in looking at if 2 years after 14 is a long enough break.
I do want to point out something that's kind of related to that. The way this is written is that Mayor Tory, who will be term limited after this time, could run for council. He's got to wait 4 years before he can run for mayor again. Not just 2 years, but 4 years.
Got it.
So that's an aspect of this. He could go to council, but got to wait before he can go to mayor.
Go ahead, Jim, and tell the rest of the story.
There's more to the story?
I'm term limited as well. I could go the other way.
That's right. Ward could run for mayor, but if he wants to run for council again, he's got to also wait 4 years. But he can run for mayor and serve 3 terms, 6 years, and at that point he would be at 14 and would have to wait 4 years before he ran again.
For me, in a small town like we are, if people are willing to run, or if people are willing to serve, I would not disqualify them from putting their hat in the ring. So I don't really have much conviction around this. It's not a big deal, but I see it along the lines of a little bit of what John said. I mean, I just so value people that can and want to participate that I just don't look for reasons to disqualify them for serving. In the conversations I've had,
Your Honor.
What's that?
Point of clarification, does BOCC have 3 terms as their limit
Yes.
and then 1 off?
Yes,
Steve Childs is term limited.
sure enough.
Adding a little color to that, sorry, Sam.
There you go.
Having career politicians is a bad thing for Aspen, and along the lines of what you were saying earlier, Tori, that the community does not expect these positions to be full-time positions. When we were talking about the mayoral role, there should be frequent turnover. This community is generally a fairly transient community. People come and go. Our community changes over time, and having career politicians that stick around forever, even if they are good leaders and effective leaders and well-regarded, doesn't mean that the policy making should stay stagnant and the same faces and voices should be up here. So I think career politicians are a really bad thing for Aspen and have proven to be so in my perspective.
I did want to just say I do strongly support term limits, but mostly because of what I see in state and national and international politics, where a lot of people do stay beyond what I'd call their best by date, but because of the nature of elections, get reelected because of like name, brand, and popularity versus commitment to community, where like fresh voices like come in and reinvigorate communities. So that's my perspective on it. I could name names, but I won't.
Again, I don't think this is that big of an issue because I don't think this is something that you can really manipulate for best results through either way. I mean, there's positive and negatives to both concepts here. It really depends on, what's happening in your community and your election. So I don't have any requests or ideas for changes here. And like I said, keep saying, I'm always open to conversation, but I don't see anything that I think needs changing here. So
I could use some clarity because I think as individuals, you're split here on whether you're seeking additional information or not, or additional examples
I am not.
or not. Okay.
I'm good as well.
I'm happy with the status quo.
I'm good with status quo.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
that brings us to the end of Article 3. That was kind of our goal for tonight, is to get through those first 3 articles. Take a look real quick here at Article 4, Council Procedures.
I may suggest Mr. Mayor, you may even want to jump over Article 4 to 5 on initiative and referendum, since there's been quite a bit about elections already in your conversation tonight. I do think staff would value from talking about Article 4. We think that we think there's a lot more work to do on implementation of Article 4 fully to expectations that probably we could not cover tonight unless you want to bump something off of your agenda for the evening.
Did council members have anything specific from Article 4 that you were interested in discussing?
The one thing that caught my eye was times for, I think that was actually in the rules, the resolution about the rules and
Right.
city council rules. I guess these two things correlate fairly closely, but in a charter could be combined to a certain extent.
So the rules are at the implementation of Article 4.
Yeah.
The rules and regulations of council. And as I've shared with other councilors, if you all haven't heard from me, is I don't know which sections of that 2005 rules have been waived because it's so old and hasn't had a formal readoption. But my understanding over time, I've learned sections of it that have been waived. And I think we all probably are at a point it would be great to be clear on what is or isn't waived. Hence why I was suggesting perhaps not to do Article 4 tonight because of its relationship to the 2005 Rules and Regulations of Council.
But you had one question around the times, meeting times?
Times, but that's more specifically spelled out in the rules. I do think we should look at these emergency ordinances. I think we should define more clearly what an emergency is. I think that's really important for Aspen. I think that's something that I believe has been abused in the past. More comments specifically that are in the rules, but those are the ones that are in the charter, I think, for me.
Okay. And other items in section 4 that were of note to anybody? Okay, then let's take one last section here. Let's go to Article 5. This is initiative and referendum. You have general authority, section 5.1, which is describing the two. Sarah, was there anything specific around these two items that you wanted to call our attention to?
No, when I've been here, I've seen this process work pretty well. The only place it gets sometimes we have to be really clear about is the petition and help folks understand about really ensuring they're using members of the electorate in their petitions. But I think that's an education process when they pull the petition from the clerk's office for them to ensure that they will have enough electoral signatures for their submission.
Okay.
You want to add anything, Jim? You deal with this section more than I do.
Yeah, I just emphasize that a lot of this is driven by the state constitution, that the state statute addresses some of the language that is directed by the state constitution, but Constitution recognizes that the right to initiative and referendum is over legislative matters, not over matters that are considered administrative. And it's normally through legislative ordinances that the right to initiative and referendum does exist, and that's constitutionally directed. The big change here that the city did a number of years ago was allow petitioners to supplement a petition if they were under the number allowed through defects, and the additional 5 days was given. But other than that, pretty much follows what the constitutional requirements and the state statute requirements are.
On that note, Jim, on 5.3A, number of signatures, is the 15% lesser or greater than the state statute requirement?
Of course, you would ask me a question I can't remember. I thought it was the same, but
As an exception to the state statute?
no, I don't think that's an exception. I think that's just designating what it is, and I think it's,
Maybe you could get back to us on this, because the section is titled Exceptions to State Statutes, and then it talks about number of signatures.
okay, well,
So I'm curious.
I haven't looked at it in a
Lowering the
while.
threshold or raising the threshold?
yeah.
Given that I have some experience with this, I do have two comments on it. One, I would love to see some kind of provision that doesn't allow council to supplement an essentially identical ordinance for one that a petition has been prepared for, which is essentially what happened with ordinance 13 in 21, 22. Wasn't by council's own volition, but I could see that happening. If council was very strong-headed on something and decided they wanted to railroad someone's petition, they could reverse one ordinance and replace it with an identical new ordinance, and therefore make somebody go do the whole initiative process again. I personally would be interested in making sure that council couldn't do that. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I quite understand it. If somebody submits a petition seeking X, Y, and Z and receives the signatures, then that needs to go to the voters.
Except what happened with ordinance 13, and again, it wasn't by council's volition in this case, but it just as easily could have been. Ordinance 13 had to be repealed or because of the lawsuit by ABOR, and it was replaced with a new ordinance that was essentially identical, but if council was all aligned on an effort like that, they could very easily invalidate a citizen's initiative because the initiative is specific to an ordinance.
So section 5.4 discusses this.
Okay.
When it's an initiative or referendum, but you're referring to a court order, which does not have those limitations on it. So it's a fundamental process difference, that's all. So section 5.4 says that there has to be at least a 6-month cooling off period before the council can take up that type of legislation again.
Yeah, you could not,
Except, but I think what that's saying, Sarah, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is if the initiative is successful and it has overturned what council at that time did, then they can't revisit it again with 6 months. What I'm saying is a council could invalidate the initiative even before it was submitted by repealing and then passing a new.
oh, I see,
Oh, yeah, I understand
what
now
you're
why the
saying.
petition's circulating.
yeah, I do understand what you're saying.
I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. That was not the circumstance that.
Again,
Yeah.
fully understand that.
Yeah, I understand it now.
Is that something that would actually be codified, or is that something that just council, where would that rest?
Well,
It would, I would say, that would be with the voters. It would not be with the governing body, because the governing body can change its ordinances
no,
at its own will.
so you're saying, as I would say, it could rest in the charter.
I would prefer that kind of direction, rests directly from the voters in the charter.
I think it would have to have the effect that Bill is suggesting. I think it would have to be a charter provision.
It would be charter language. Okay. Are there two other council members that support more information on Bill's suggestion, which is, basically just council action drafting a new ordinance in the face of challenge on previous ordinance, something to that effect? More information on that?
Yeah, I could see that being useful, at least more information for greater trust in office. Bill had a very specific example, but I can see this going the other way for another group of people that are a complete other side of the fence of like this example, so I'd be interested in at least learning about more.
Yeah, I'll be a third to say I'm interested in the information. I don't know what that language looks like, but the intent, I think, is something that all of us are supportive of. So I'd want to have the conversation more.
I support more information too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question on 5.3 B. The 5 days additional, is that just for curing or is that to seek additional signatures on a petition?
Well, I will tell you that that's somewhat unclear in the language that's actually used, but the argument that was made to the court in the petitions that involve the construction of the building argued that it is a curing effort. You couldn't submit 3 signatures or 150 invalid signatures that did not come anywhere close to receiving the proper number and then seeking that 5-day cure, and the court held in our favor on that.
Jim, could you brief us on what happened in Basalt with that petition?
In Basalt?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
On the Midland project, I'm guessing.
They don't like staple holes, Ward.
Yes, like Ward, which issue? Because they've had a few.
there was a petition circulated for the Midland Avenue. It was ruled insufficient and then it was ruled sufficient. What grounds was it ruled sufficient?
I'm happy to follow up with you individually. I
Okay,
just want to
thank you.
ensure I talk with the town manager there to make sure I have it straight.
Yeah, I do not know the background or the facts of that.
Okay,
The one other thing I'd suggest to council is in 5.5, that the way that it's worded is a bit unclear, that the practice of council has been, no matter what the question is posed, it's approved by ordinance. And the way this reads has been our stricter interpretation of this section of the charter, but I think it could use some clarity for future councils, that it's literally not a motion on a question to place it, but it must go through that ordinance process to ensure the proper record keeping.
Fine with me.
Ordinance or question on people? No. Yes. You're saying your suggestion is at 5.5 is to clarify that?
5.7.
You said 5.5.
My apologies, I meant 5.7. It's a very simple statement, but we've taken the more conservative interpretation of it, that it has to be done by ordinance to comply with various laws. So it's just a point of order that if you're going to look at this, there's little things like that. For example, most modern charters are, as you notice, this one refers to a lot of men and him and his, and that language is often also modernized. It's things like this that we see through this at the staff level when an interpretation needs to be made about 5.7. We want it by ordinance.
Which is identical to 5.5.
Same as 5.5.
It is identical? Oh, see, there you go.
The Scrivener's issue there, I have no idea how that's.
Yeah,
surfaced.
so some attention,
right.
some attention needs to be
So much.
played here to 5.5 and 5.7 because they are redundant. The other one does have a reference to ordinance number 42 of 2003. So I don't know what's contained there, but yes, Sarah, what you're suggesting is something that council members are supportive of. Cleaning that up.
One more sort of general question on this and elections broadly. Are the state statutes being updated or contemplating updates for any sort of digital,
Not yet.
less antiquated procedures? Like, you know, I found the initiative process that I led to be really cumbersome with these paper packets, and not, you know, if someone was out of town, there was no way to get their signature to be part of that packet. I don't know if any of that's being explored or whether we should venture to do our own version of that, which is not my preference, but I'm curious if the state is taking that on at all.
So when the Secretary of State was with us last, he was very unsupportive of this type of activity. I think that was kind of the summary of his comments when he came to visit us. We can always ask him to come back, see if he has any updates.
Jenna?
No, it was, who was before Jenna? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But the key issue here is that right now, the election system is so behind the authentication process that's used by banking and technology firms and so on to authenticate the voter. And we haven't seen that come along. You'll see some talk about this in the elections white paper, that they're securing elections so much more that there's a big resistance to the use of that technology, and still relying on the paper mail-in version. And I think it's the same probably in the initiative process. But we can bring back to you, because that's a really good question that I'm just looking at, Jen. If we don't have it addressed in the election white paper about digital voting, we should get that information to you, what we've heard.
Right, and I guess at the very least, I'd be interested in understanding if initiative packets could be supplemented with,
Electronic signatures?
but no, just individual, for example, if somebody lives 4 months a year at a different place, and that's when the thing is ongoing, but they want to participate and they're not in Aspen, there's no way for them to do so right now. So could they mail an original signature on a separate piece of paper to be added to the packet? I think that would be valuable,
Okay, we can
given
look into that.
Aspen's unique
Look at
characteristics.
it, yeah.
Okay. All right. That takes us, yeah,
Bill, can I ask for clarification? I think your request was for a digital process for an initiative and not for a digital process for actual voting?
correct.
Well, I don't have a specific request, to be clear. I was just curious if there are updates in progress for that at a state level. Then my last request was, at the very least, in terms of the initiative process, which is really cumbersome, and that's what was the subject of the basalt issues that you were referring to earlier, is, the receipt of each citizen's signature needs to be witnessed by the packet collector, or whatever the term is for that, and they all have to be on the same form, exact same form that's been approved by the clerk's office. You can't mail off one page of that to somebody and have them sign it and receive it back. There's no provisions for how to collect some of those signatures at a distance at all, and so my specific request on that would to be add some exceptions to state process, I guess, for that purpose.
I think that the provisions are pretty good. I've been involved in a couple of initiative petitions, and as I recall, basalt was decided on a packet, had been unstapled, had been, something had been removed from it and added back in. But, if somebody wants to look and see if something's going on at the state level, but I think that it's pretty important that those, the text of the ordinance and everything remain intact and be witnessed. So, there's been so much discussion about validity of elections, and I don't want to wind up getting into a question of validity of initiatives like we've gone through with City Hall and like Basalt has gone through. So I think that we should keep it as tight as possible.
Okay, the request of council is for more information around state statutes regarding signature collections. Are there two other council members that want that information?
Yes.
My position is that to get a petition, you need 15% of the total number of electors registered to vote. I think if you can't find 15% of your voters in town, I think that's a low bar. I'm happy with the way things are.
Have you ever done it, John?
I've run for office, so I have had to collect signatures for a petition, yes.
Well, 25.
That's how many were required, yeah.
You know what 15% of the total number of voters is?
Not off the top of my head.
It's a lot.
900?
Bill, I agree with you. It's not an easy process, and I think it's meant to be that way.
No, agreed, but, I think that, for example, Ward, when you're off in Maine for the summer, wouldn't you like to have a voice on something that you feel passionate about if you're not in Aspen for the summer?
I do. I do have a
That's all,
voice.
that's all I'm suggesting.
Sounds good. We have 3 people that want to have that information come back. I'm being one of them. So we'll find out if there are any changes at a state level to address this kind of concern.
I just want to clarify, Mr. Mayor, I said it was the Secretary of State that joined us. It was not. It was Attorney General Phil Weiser.
Okay, with that, that takes us through Article 5 with a not in-depth look at Article 4 right now. We're going to move on to, we're going to go back to our original topic. So we're going to conclude this section of our work session. The meat of that in the first couple of articles is what we wanted to kind of really talk about. I think there's less as we go through this. I think we can probably schedule another hour at a work session in the near future to finish this. My request to council members would be please go through Articles 6 and on to see if there are specific areas of questions for you. That may make our next engagement on this be as quick as possible. Ward. Unmute.
Sorry, back to that again.
Yep.
Did we go through 4, or are we supposed to do that as homework as well?
You can look at 4. That will be in our next meeting around this. Yep. Okay. If there's no other questions or comments or any needs from staff, then let's go back to our first topic of our work session agenda this evening.
Excitement for you now.
Fingers crossed.
Drum roll, please.
Still doing that. There we go.
Is the issue going to full screen when it freezes?
Did we not go to the PDF? Or are we good now? Is that moving?
We're good. I just got a Zoom quit unexpectedly prompt, though. As soon as
This is what happened to Bonnie's previously.
He's here.
It's doing it again.
Yeah.
Let's find out.
We have a memo in our packet, so if we can't get this going, we can work off of the memo. I'm gonna go grab a sip of water. If you get that going, please do it without me.
Okay. It doesn't seem to respond to
Just causing Zen to totally crash.
No, it did that time. No, now we're going. It's working now.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, so I will start with the history of REMP that I got into a little bit earlier while we were having technical difficulties. Again, this program was started back in 1999. It has now spread to many other mountain communities around Colorado, have programs that were modeled on the one that began in Aspen and Pickens County. The way that the program works is that exterior energy uses such as snowmelt and pools and spas are offset with on-site renewable energy, such as a PV system. There's also an option if an applicant doesn't want to do on-site renewables, they can pay a fee in lieu, which then goes to fund community programs for energy efficiency. We recently did a large update to our building and energy codes. This was a multi-year process where we came to council several times for direction. First, in May of 2021, where council directed us to get the energy code to line up with council's climate action goals around reducing carbon emissions. We also came back for a work session in September of 2022, and one of the main takeaways for the energy code from that work session was that in addition to reducing carbon emissions, it is also important to reduce energy loads, which will make electrification more feasible in the future. Ordinance 1 of 2023, back in January of last year, adopted the 2021 Building and Energy Codes, which included a new REMP appendix. This was a very large package of building code and energy code amendments, including things like ignition resistance construction in the building code. The energy code had a lot of updates around the building envelope, and also included changes to the REMP appendix, which also required us to adopt a new REMP calculator tool, which came into effect with Resolution 27 in February of 2023. So a lot of the efforts around the energy code changes adopted last year were in response to City Council's climate action goals. As a reminder, the goals are around 63% emissions reduction by 2030, 100% or net zero by 2050. And that chart there comes from the 2020 greenhouse gas and shows that, you know, buildings, both commercial and residential, make up a very large percentage of the emissions and need to be addressed to meet those goals. So what changed with the REMP program? The original REMP included snowmelt, pools, permanent spas. It was expanded to now include heat tape, gas fireplaces and fire pits, both interior and exterior, as well as outdoor heating. You can leave it on that slide for a second. And the reason why we brought these new types of exterior energy use into the program are because they're really large energy users. Just to give you some comparisons, the heat tape, if you use 167 linear feet of heat tape, the annual average consumption around that would be similar to 10% of a U.S. home, the average size home, which is 1,250 square feet across the U.S. also a 50,000 BTU outdoor gas-fired patio heater would use as much energy annually as the average American home. So we targeted these energy uses. As we have implemented this code, we have gotten some concerns from mainly local businesses who have found the cost around offsetting the energy use to be prohibitive. And in response to that, we have brought some ideas for your consideration. I'm going to hand it over to Dennis to talk about heat tape first.
Bonnie, can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
On those energy use comparisons that you just mentioned relating to both the heat tape and the outdoor heater, are those extrapolated based on like 24/7 use or seasonal use? How am I understanding how the energy is used?
Sure. Those are based on usage that we use in our REMP calculator. And the usage came out of a public input process in Summit County when they were doing their REMP work around estimated usage for the various things. Heat tape in particular, we now have controls that are required in the code, so that really reduces the runtime. And that comparison was based on if controls are in place, not 24/7 usage.
So the 10% of the typical 1,250 square foot house is with controls, latest technology,
Correct.
Practical usage scenario?
Yes.
Thanks.
So ice dams are exciting. We have addressed ice dams over the years with, it was the late 70s, the building department required had a code change to change the roof load, snow load from 40 pounds to 75 pounds with no reductions at that time. We require the first 6 feet from edge of roof to be ice and water shield because snow will fall off, but ice creeps back up. So we're fortunate in Aspen, most people take that ice and water shield all the way up. Also, we put an ordinance in, I looked back, as far as I could find, I think it was in the 80s as well, that for downsloping roofs over walkways and potential hazards, property, garage doors, that if you had a downsloping roof that could be hazardous to a slide of snow, we required a proposal of a snow retention system. We understand that ice damming can happen, depend on the design of the roof and how the quality of the construction works out. So damming could happen based on basically you have a conditioned space, the eave is typically non-conditioned underneath, you have a warm roof surface, a cold surface above, snow melts, gets to the edge where there is no warm underneath it, ice begins to form. I think we go to the next one. The downsloping roofs, where it can't just slide off and be not a hazard, we look for the retention system. And then part of the answer to that is to direct the melt water when it does melt to a drain and a downspout and a location for the water to go. So the roof is designed to not allow the snow to shed. The roof is designed structurally to hold the load. The roof is designed to protect against creeping ice back up into the roof assembly. So shoveling roofs, but the last resort basically is any heat tape, and the heat tape is intended to direct melt water when it melts to the proper location for the water. It has not been a method to remove ice dams. It's a method to drain ice dams. So the roof can take the ice dam, it's prepared for it, but when it does melt, we need to have a way to get it to the drain. And so varying degrees of success with this. These were a couple of photos. The picture there is the old Armory building. There's a, it's called the hot edge system on the north end of the building that is very energy efficient, uses a lot less power than heat tape per se. The heat tapes that we see are anywhere from 6 to 20 volts per lineal foot. In our REMP discussion, we wanted to address that and really provide a way for meltwater to get to the gutter. So gutters and downspouts is where it should be. Sometimes a weave will help break it up. But the picture on the left there is, it's hard to tell if that heat tape was running, but our intent is to have safe downsloping roofs where they're over public way. Our other intent for the code for 30 or 40 years now has been to have intentional design, that you don't design a roof to down shed over a walkway or a driveway. With this adoption going into effect April of 2023, we've had quite a bit of conversation with nearly 75 roofs replaced on the residential side and several commercial ones. That's the trigger for the true up on the heat tape. And it's been received just like any change to our REMP program. When we first went after the outdoor energy uses, it was a bit of a shock, and this one as well. But what we've seen is more intentional use of heat tapes to direct meltwater rather than try and remove snow from a roof. We're fortunate, most of our commercial work does not have downsloping roofs over sidewalks. There occasionally happens, and it's a big conversation when we're building new, but our roofs can take it at least since early 80s, that you don't have to, the roof will take it if an ice dam builds and if it's held in place, and then melts after that.
Okay, and with outdoor heating, part of the energy code that we adopted prohibited fuel-fired exterior heat. And that's not something that we approve anymore in permanent installations with permit, but a kind of unintentional result of that regulation and the fact that portable devices don't require permitting from the city is that a lot of businesses have gone even heavier into portable propane heaters and devices. Staff is looking to get clearer direction on how you would like to have that handled. We feel that current code still applies to that, and that the prohibition to gas should, be pursued in some way, shape, or form, but that it's impactful enough to the business communities that we want to get some better direction on how to go about that. The primary reasons that businesses are turning to propane portable devices, it's a much lower upfront cost to get into that when compared to permanent electric radiant heat sources. You can go online, down to Walmart, any number of different devices, styles, things that'll cater to like any aesthetic that businesses want. They're very easy to source and set up. When you compare that to more permanent electric options, it's much more cost prohibitive. It's much more involved to install. And also a lot of the tenants and restaurant spaces in town view that as a more permanent building installation than they want to pursue, whereas these are portable devices that come and go with them when they move or relocate. As we kind of touched on earlier, these are not small energy loads. Your typical kind of freestanding propane palm tree style heater. I think we used a smaller house in an earlier example, but two of those, they range about 50,000 BTUs. And two of those is the equivalent of the annual energy use of a 2,250 square foot average American home. And that is using that same runtime assumptions, which what that is 4 hours a day, 36 weeks a year. And we feel that that's very accurate. We see that that is used, these are used much more year-round than just in the wintertime. More and more spaces are looking to warm and condition their exterior patios and outdoor dining areas in the shoulder seasons and even in summer evenings. And it's a very inefficient and goes against all the other goals of our climate action and greenhouse gas initiatives. It's also a unknown and kind of hard to quantify item because the greenhouse gases associated with that are not easily tracked because it's not permanent natural gas supply that we can see on someone's bill.
So as Ben mentioned in the introduction, we have some questions around heat tape and portable heaters, outdoor heaters that we have, and are looking for some direction on high level where you want to go with these concepts, and then we can, if desired, bring you back more information the form of an ordinance and code change. So our first question is, should the REMP regulations for commercial heat tape continue to require 100% offset as adopted in Ordinance 1 of 2023? The memo offered a couple alternatives that we could offer as options for commercial heat tape, which would, one option would be to offset it at a lesser rate or for a different duration period, or look into some specific exemptions around areas that shed over walkways.
Thanks so much. All right, council members, let's go through this a little bit. We'll start with the heat tape issue. Let's get some input. Bill?
Firstly, thank you all for the presentation and the information. Specific question for Dennis on heat tape. Dennis, is there a tried and tested alternative to heat tape for the situations that you described where there's ice dams and icicles, particularly on downsloping roofs?
Alternative to drain the ice dam to a gutter?
Well, let's say I have a downsloping roof over a pedestrian walkway. In the past, it has produced ice dams and icicles. It has we've tried whatever, I'm making a fictitious example here. We've tried whatever snow retention devices are available to us. It presents a hazard to the public because snow can slide in one big thing, icicles can fall on people's heads. We've mitigated that risk with heat tape over the years. If I can't do heat tape, what do I do?
what we're seeing is there's the hot edge one, which we've experimented on some city properties. There was another one, which is Malcolm Nark put together. It's a single tape to a sheet of metal to use less metal. The controls has been a big, our staff, Nick Thompson, took to the national level a control requirement that's now in the code. And every roof's a little different, right? But the snow retention is number one. The roof design is there to hold the snow. Occasionally a manual shovel of it, or if you can get there. But again, from what we've understood is what we were seeing before this was they say that the heat tape is self-modulating and it goes hot and goes cold on its own. But what we found is from the statistics you saw, we're essentially heating a single-family home with that heat tape energy. Intentional use of heat tape in a manner that is to allow the dam to not build because I have a channel through it that's about that wide. And that's all it really takes to get beyond that to a gutter, to a downspout. We have seen, and the ability to understand that if there's an ice dam on this roof, the roof can take it. It's just the sliding part that we have to stop. And then the hot edge product is another more intentional, less energy intrusive, and worked, if you look at the north side of City Hall, works fantastic. And that we've been, this code adoption was going after energy that if you look at how many permits people have reduced quite a bit and offset quite a bit. So is there another answer? And then then what we've seen is a new product, which is somewhat like an RV antifreeze product that would release with a temperature or a snow gauge. I'm not sure exactly what its controls are, but it squirts a little antifreeze, and the antifreeze takes it down to a gutter and gets it off that way.
And then there's the option of overframing, more involved, but if someone is looking to replace their roof and wants to look into doing more air sealing and then adding insulation.
Insulation, air sealing in an existing roof is super important because now I don't get the heat coming through that thermal layer, right? So the intent is that if I have better insulation and better air sealing, the water vapor will get through, or the heat will get through the can lights or other penetrations in the roof, sealed better, insulated better. Cold roof option is the number one that you can do on and again, part of our addition to the REMP was people to look at other options. And sometimes an overframe can be done relatively easy. And then I don't have the hot air, cold air, ice dam layer. I got cold air the whole time, and it just stays snow. It's still going to have a snow retention based on its downslope and the hazard below. But so structural design, proper air sealing, proper insulation, a cold roof above, snow retention, a small pathway for water. That's really, options that are out there. So heat tape's not your only option by any means. And there are more efficient methods now if you have to use electricity to do it.
And heat tape and those more efficient options are still addressing the symptom and not the cause. The cause is that heat from inside the building is working its way through, warming that roof surface over the conditioned space. That's where you get your premature thaw when it's still freezing out. That moves down to the eave and refreezes, addressing the actual cause of the heat damming would be the ideal solution.
Thanks for that. So I think there's a big difference in roofs that were constructed under fairly recent codes than dated roofs, is what I'm hearing, and in my personal experience. And that, maybe you'd agree with this, maybe you wouldn't. It's fair to say that relatively recently constructed roofs and buildings, both because of codes and better construction materials and better construction techniques, have a lot less need for heat tape than older roofs. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, typically the older roof has the worst insulation, right? So if you had an opportunity to insulate, air seal, and modify the roof assembly, that's where you go. The easy answer is I'll put some heat tape on it, but what we're after is what's the function of the heat tape? Again, if in Aspen in winter on a north-facing downsloping roof, you're going to get melting happening usually when the sun's out, which is around 10 to 2. And so if you control the path for melt to that time frame, use a lot less energy, and then you would then also, when melting, provide the path for it to get off the roof to help to not build big dams.
Yeah.
But to your point, it is primarily an issue for existing buildings. If properly designed, new construction should not need heat tape or very, very little.
Yeah. My house was built, at least the roof structure for the most part was built in the 80s. I wish I didn't have to use heat tape, but I do. Otherwise, it starts raining from inside the house. The ice dams creep up, it gets in. I got a lot of damage to repair. So, I think what I'd like to sort of take away from this, and maybe others share this understanding, is that we've got a problem with older buildings, less so with newer buildings. There isn't a low capital or a reasonable capital expenditure solution to this in our climate. Building a new roof on top of your existing roof is extraordinarily expensive, and with height limits and things may be impossible in our community. So I think this is something we can't just say you can't have, and is difficult for us to penalize people because their building is older. And along the lines of something John has mentioned many times up here, is the most efficient building is the building that exists today. So without having to tear down the building because it's outdated, I think we need to be reasonable with people who have older structures.
And that was where our 1,000 watts came in. It's about 167 feet of 6-watt tape. And on the average, we took that from Pickens County, Summit County, when this conversation came up for us. The research we had found was that was the number that Pickens County had been using since 2018. The first 1,000 feet are exempt. And so we were aware of the point you make, and that's why we started with 1,000 watts. Part of the conversation is that enough for some of the roofs that are challenged by all the things you just said. And like I said, we don't have very many commercial buildings that have the dangerous configurations. Single-family homes, it's all over the place, right? The architect does not contemplate where the walkway is going to go when he draws a beautiful home. That's what we're up against there as well. But it's not the only answer. It's a last resort. I think in your packet you saw some stuff from Joe Stibrick, and we had good conversations with him at our adoption on what's our best method to do here. So we felt that a bit of an exemption, and then controls, and because that's the way to get to it. And we have roof designs. There's rarely a home or a building left in this town that doesn't have the structural capacity to hold a load, right? And sometimes, a small retention system or a bigger retention system could be modified as much as just a bigger retention system, and intentional heat tape, and we're there. right? We are all about life safety, right? It's been in our wheelhouse since 1955, I guess, when our department started, but energy conservation and aligning with climate action, and that's where what we discovered was it's very consumptive, and so trying to cut that back and do it intentional is where we're after.
Thanks. So to answer your specific questions from my table, unless other counselors have questions that they want answered before.
Ward's got his hand up.
Go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, Bill, in direct answer to your question about, is there an alternative to heat tape that's energy efficient? I don't know that there is. I think that heat tape might be required. I know that you're aware of a building, I think, on Puppy Smith Street that was using the antifreeze solution that I think Dennis mentioned. And I think they used it last year and it wasn't sufficient. They have a new installation this year. And I'm curious if that's been monitored and how efficient that has been. I think that it's going to be, if every replacement of tape requires rent mitigation, it's going to be expensive. And I know that you've amortized this over 20 years. It's still going to be somewhat inflationary depending on how the owner of the building is going to recoup that cost, because undoubtedly they're going to recoup it by increased rents, and increased rents mean that hamburger costs a little bit more, or that calamari costs a little bit more. In the memo, it says staff has offered reasonable accommodations, and I'm curious how those suggested accommodations have been received by the community, and those particularly that have expressed concern about the rent fees and heat tape. That's a first question. How have those been received?
These are the options that we have thought could be reasonable accommodations. Currently, there is the 1,000-watt exemption, like Dennis mentioned, but we have heard from some property owners and property managers that is not enough, and that the fee in lieu was too high.
So it hasn't been received, or is there a compromise that's been suggested or discussed? I just want to know how working with the community and the people that are affected by this have been, what their reaction has been to the compromises or the solutions that have been suggested.
Ward, this has been, I think a couple of things I would say to this. One, I think the questions that we're asking now, this evening, are the things that we've thought about. If council agrees that we need to find sort of accommodations, that these might be things to consider, offsetting at a different rate, giving an additional exemption in terms of wattage or linear feet, depending on how you wanted to go with that. We can come up with specific numbers later. I will say that one of the things that I think staff struggles with, and I think it's more applicable to commercial properties than residential properties. I think in this question really, I think, applies both to the topics of heat tape and the outdoor heating, is that, I think in our commercial buildings, we're ultimately concerned with the effect on tenants, right? And what that means for, the price of a hamburger or any of the other goods that come out of our commercial sector in town. And one of the things that I think staff, didn't necessarily understand, and I think it's a difficult thing to understand, is, this offset of 20 years has been part of REMP for a long time, and that turns into a fairly significant number in total, but over 20 years, it becomes less onerous. That doesn't really cause problems for the owner of a single-family home, because they're the owner of the place, and, it's built into the cost of the home, et cetera. For commercial tenants, one of the things that we came to understand in having conversations around this topic is that rent fees and the replacement of the heat tape system is not considered a capital expense. It's amortized sort of in the rents over 20 years for a building. The entirety of these costs are being hit in a one-time assessment as part of their triple net lease, as opposed to sort of spreading that out over 20 years. And so when staff thinks about that, you know, the property that we've had most conversation about, the replacement of their heat tape system, the rent fee coming out of it was $16,000. In no world is $16,000 an insignificant sum. However, you spread that out over 20 years, it's $800 for the property, you spread that out over the tenants in the building, and that's a fairly insignificant sum over the course of, you know, an annual lease. But when that entire $16,000 plus the replacement of the heat tape system is all sort of coming down in one lump payment, that changes the dynamics and the economics of that for the tenant significantly. And that's what we're running into. So on top of, I think, all of the sort of technical nature of what's the appropriate response to, you know, building science and better technology or better construction technique and, you know, improved insulation, all that kind of stuff, is this dynamic with how triple net leases work and the trickle down of some of these policies on an individual tenant and the way that their leases are structured. And that's something that staff, I don't think we understood until we started to have some in-depth conversations with folks about this. And I think to some degree that same dynamic is part of the discussion about the outdoor heaters as well, as just the nature of leases and what people are on the hook for and what, you know, landlords pick up and what tenants are expected to sort of pay for. So I think these things that we're suggesting, you know, we're working off of 100% offset. You know, should we change the duration period when we sort of assess a rent payment on commercial heat tape? And then, you know, is there an option to provide a greater exemption for commercial properties? I think those are the things that we think would be a reasonable sort of response to this, or areas for reasonable responses to this, outside of, you know, just saying free for all on heat tape.
And I know Bill opined on this, and I respect his expertise in the building community, but I'm curious, what would the cost be to put a cold roof layer over an existing roof? And is there a possibility of getting federal or grant money to help cover that? And is there a way to incentivize that by having some of that subsidized by the government? Because I think that we all agreed that greenhouse gas emissions are an important thing to address. But I also want to know, on an individual, it's a lot, you know, 1,250 square feet, depending on, I think Dennis quoted a number that was different in the memo that I saw, but I thought it was 1,250 square feet of a building. That's not insignificant for heat tape. And how many buildings are we talking about that are using heat tape?
Yeah, I think, Ward, to your first question, I don't know. I think it would depend entirely on the roof, from one roof to the next. I don't know that we have a number for that. And in terms of sort of possible grant support for that, again, potentially, but we'd have to look into that significantly. I think in terms of administering the program, the questions that staff has proposed in the memo are probably the things that we can do most immediately in response to concerns that we've heard from folks that are replacing these systems in our commercial buildings.
I want to toss out something that was debated, I think, before I was on council, but there was for buildings that were built that had no workforce housing mitigation, they were encouraged to supply that sooner rather than later, I think, phasing in so that the sooner you did it, the less it cost you. I think the building that was used was a butcher block building was used as the example of that. Rings a bell. And so along those lines, I'm wondering if there is a way of ramping this in so that if there is an alternative, I didn't get an answer on the antifreeze roof solution, if that was working, if that's acceptable, if that is an acceptable alternative to heat tape. I'm
I
just
think
trying to
that's to
explore
be
different
determined.
opportunities and a way to make it phased in and less onerous.
In talking with the property manager of the Puppy Smith building, that system has really just come online in the last month or so. So I think at the end of this season, we'll have more information on whether or not that worked well for them.
What's the delta between heat tape and that type of installation?
I'd have to do more research.
The cost of the product was part of the conversation with them. But what we don't want to get lost in this program, when we started the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, the intent was to offset on-site with renewables. And the cost that the rent payment option was essentially equivalent to the cost to install a system that generates energy 365 days a year. Heat tapes are not always on if managed properly. Sometimes here they are. When I talked to electricians, we were doing some study on this. But, you know, the $16,000 essentially is a 7 kW PV system mounted on the roof that would essentially pay for the electricity for that tape, and then quite a bit of other generated energy beyond that. So the intentional way is to offset your energy uses on site. And so we encouraged for years and years and years people to do that, and it wasn't cool when we started this program, and now it's more cool than it used to be. And most people will invest in a solar system. We're seeing Tesla roofs, we're seeing integral roof systems, we're seeing, but that's our, what we're after there is that investment into generating power on your site is a year-round gain rather than a one-time cost. So you have to get beyond the cost if you invest in the property and the system, because you'll get it back in its payback. It has a payback instead of just running the power.
Thank you. All right, John and Sam, do you have any questions that you need answered before we start moving forward?
I don't have any questions. I have a couple of things I'd like to say, though.
Go ahead.
Is now the appropriate time to talk about outdoor heating?
We have further
Okay.
questions later.
Okay, well, let's just talk about REMP then. I wanted to talk about heat tape really quick because I'm aware that it's kind of like snow tires. Some people take their snow tires off in the summertime and put them back on in the fall, but I know there are plenty of homes that forget to turn off their heat tape and it's on all summer long. Just wanted to put that out there. I'm comfortable with the regulations as they sit because based on the roof alternatives Dennis has given us tonight, I think this is the direction we need to be going. There's options out there for people to not use heat tape.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so listen, Council, let's just stay at the high level. Your first question up here is kind of what John just answered, which is, are you comfortable with where we're at, or are you looking for some modifications or improvements to this program? So, Bill.
I would like some modifications. I like the latter option based on linear feet or of roof edge or valley shedding. I think that's a more fair way of applying it rather than just a flat 1,000 watt. Is that right? 1,000 watt exemption. There's a big difference between a 2,000 square foot roof and a 20,000 square foot roof, for example. So that's my preference. Thanks.
Is it 1,000 watt or 1,000 linear feet?
Watts.
Thank you. Okay. Ward, do you like the program as it sits, or are you looking for improvements?
I want more data points. I want to know what the delta is on some of those questions and if how much it costs for an alternative for, you know, the type of system Puppy Smith Street put in, and to see if it is sufficient, how that compares. I want to reduce the energy usage of heat tape, but I want to look at what some of the alternatives are. What is the delta? What would it cost to put a cold roof that would protect from this? So I'd like to have a little bit more information, but I think that the linear feet makes more sense to me. I want to know what the right amount is. Is it a 6 watt, 7 watt? What is the right amount of tape per foot of street or sidewalk? How many? And I want to know how many buildings there are. Well, what are we looking at in its entirety for the heat tape issue? So I would like to see more information.
Thank you, Ward. Sam?
Yeah, thank you. As a big proponent of preventing climate change and climate initiatives, I think it's vastly important to have viable alternatives and to not force initiatives down people's throats when they don't necessarily work. And I really hope this does work, what you just described, whether it be the liquid antifreeze or some other alternative. But in the meantime, I do think an exemption needs to be in place until those are viable alternatives are proven to be working. So, thank you.
All right. Okay, I think what you hear here is that and I'm more in the camp of Ward on this. If you need direction from me on this, other than me saying I support us pursuing our policy goals that we have already stated, and Dennis, you summed them up. You said, look, this is about energy consumption, this is about health and safety. So for me to get further in depth with this about these two choices of ways to do it, I would need more information, like Ward was saying. I don't know what the real impact is. I don't have any real life examples of what we're really talking about. I don't know how much heat tape is sufficient for what size building or roof or whatever. As I look at these that are in front of me, I probably would support the second one in these two, in what's presented. I'd probably be more in line with the second one and not the first one. But I can't really give you some strong support for that without some more information. Again, what I'm looking for here is a community acceptable solution. This is one of those ones where I think that there's a middle ground that makes sense for all parties, and I just don't know what that is. I really don't. I haven't installed heat tape in a long time. Never. So I don't know. I need more information about what the real impacts are here. I'm just not informed enough. I don't have any problem with the offset as described as me that we're doing it now, but I think that there's a better way to get the behavior that we want, right? We don't want the money that offsets. That's not what we want. We want the behaviors that make this safe and efficient and make common sense for people that are both looking to install these, but also the community that deals with long-term impacts from an issue like this. So I just need more information before I go anywhere. But I will say, of what's presented, I can see the second one being a better option. John?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to my comments. I do know of, and thanks, Bill, for bringing this up, I do know of quite a few homes that have been built years ago, sometimes over 100 years ago, that do have poorly insulated roofs, and bless you. And I also would like more information, because I know that for a lot of our long-term locals, putting on a new roof would be cost prohibitive, and heat tape is the only answer. So more information.
Just clarity on that question. I think we were.
You're on red.
Thank you. This is different here. I think this is really a conversation about commercial. Is there intention to have conversation about residential as well?
Yes.
Sounds like it.
Okay. I heard consensus around sort of exemption. We'll look at that, put together a proposal, provide some additional information when we come back to you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the second half of this item. This is talking about outdoor heaters. I want to be very clear here. For me, this does not come down to heating people that are eating. I am most concerned with the heaters that are on, that are left on with nobody there. I'm concerned about the heaters that are used as decorative, is what I would call it. I think all of us are aware they're often used to basically signal that a restaurant is open. And wayfinding, if you will. So, I don't have any problem with people sitting outside and being warmed by a heater, even if it's a portable heater and stuff. I get it. That's a behavior change that I'm not willing to start tackling in this manner. So that's my concern here is first steps for me are really about ratcheting down on the unnecessary and unused yet still on heaters and burning the gas that they are. Bless you. So that's where I am with this. When it comes to permit requirement, again, I'm going to go to other council members first because for me, it's about eliminating or reducing the frivolous usage that I see going on. But in my conversations over the last year, I hear that that's a difficult chunk of this issue to bite off on its own. So I'm going to hold off on further comment. Other council members, Ward, I'm going to start with you. The first question that's up on our screen is about an annual permit requirement with a REMP offset. So this is something that could be put in to tackle the immediate situation that we see, but is not necessarily a long-term solution or behavior changer. What is your input on the outdoor heaters, Ward?
Well, for a stopgap measure, I think that permits for propane are appropriate. They're burning greenhouse gases, and I would do it by heater, not by property. But I'm looking at a longer term solution where we look at the delta between electric and propane. Propane, I think, is obviously it's certainly considered to be a lot less expensive, or natural gas a lot less expensive than electric. And the idea of trying to incentivize the use of electric from 100% renewable grid is much more in line with what I feel is important for the reduction of greenhouse gas. I agree with you, Tori, on ornamental lighting from burning fossil fuels. I would do away with that. And I would want to know what the most efficient, whether it's propane or electric, if the mushroom or overhead are most efficient for heating people, but I've seen some fixtures that are down lower. So whatever, to incentivize electric, but to get some kind of a RIP fee for commercial propane and buy the heater, not buy the property.
Thanks, Ward. Sam, I'm going to go to you next.
Have we done outreach yet to restaurants to talk about this? Because we talked about this a long time ago in the summer, spring, or maybe it was the fall, but I don't think we've asked nicely yet.
I will say we've had lots of conversations with individual businesses as they've sort of contemplated this, as they've looked at electric heaters versus propane. They've come in for permit. They haven't come in for permit. We've, applied started to apply building code provisions and REM calculation fees on stuff. And, on these, again, very similarly to the heat tape conversation, you know, the restaurant business is a difficult thing to be a long-term participant in, particularly in a community like Aspen. And we amortize rent calculations over 20 years. And so you have a business who wants to put in heaters, electric heaters, do the right thing. It becomes this, you know, expensive proposition. We have gone around and done kind of an informal survey across town about how many of these are out there. There's a lot. A lot of them, there's a lot of them. And if you go to Gondola Plaza, if you look down alleyways, there's lots of propane tanks around. So we know that these are really important to businesses, either for the purposes of attractants or for actually heating people. Again, year-round, I think, is important. So we don't have any question that this is an important topic for the restaurant community. We also know that there's, from one property to the next, whether it's their electrical service on their building or whether it's transformer capacity, like, there's obstacles to going electric. And under the current code, if you come in for a building permit right now for those electric heaters, even though we want them, you're getting hit with a significant rent fee for doing a permit with the electric heaters, because they're an outdoor energy use along the same lines as heat tape or pools or spas or et cetera. And so it's one of the things that, again, the code doesn't necessarily differentiate is electric. Propane, you know, natural gas you can't do at all per code. Like, you couldn't hardwire a natural gas appliance right now. You could certainly do electric, but again, you come in for permit, you're hit with individual building service, transformer capacity, and then a rent fee. And, you know, I think most folks are going to, particularly for a restaurant that, you know, doesn't know if they're going to be there next year, that's really not a conversation. So we know pretty clearly how folks feel about this. For a lot of businesses, it's super important to their business activity, but we find ourselves in a difficult place of having codes that we're not enforcing right now. That's where we find ourselves.
I completely get that. I still think more information is needed to understand the restaurant point of view and like what it would do to them. Because to like lend support to an annual permit without knowing that would feel like going in blind. So,
John?
Yeah, I'm going to probably repeat a lot of Tori's comments, maybe elaborate on some of them, but this outdoor propane heating use is, it concerns me because I think COVID might have been part of it, but it seems like we've evolved from those heaters actually heating people to saying we're open. And it's no longer just at night or just in the wintertime. It's all day and it's all year round. Over at the Gondola Plaza, there are storage containers for propane tanks. There are 10 of them. They hold 28 bottles each. That's 280 bottles of propane. That tells me somebody's using a lot of propane. And anyway, I, like Tori, I'm not offended by those heat lamps when people are sitting next to them. But when they're right by the front door and they're heating nobody and it's the middle of the day and there's nobody around, that bothers me. And I do think that Aspen is better than that. And we shouldn't be burning fossil fuels decoratively.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bill?
Thanks. I'm certainly not supportive of a permit requirement for heaters. I understand the issue with ornamental use of these heaters, and perhaps there's an avenue we can explore to prohibit and educate on that with some outreach and conversations with businesses. But what's being contemplated or posed to us here is not just limited to commercial, I don't think, but residential also. And I don't want an enforcement team going around asking whether I've got a permit for my portable gas heater on my back patio personally. So, nor do I think the city could ever support that effort. I think this is something that's unenforceable, unrealistic. There's so much turnover related to this event use of these things. it's just not realistic, and I like eating outside, and I like having a heater to warm me up if it's cold, and I'm not, I don't have the right clothing, so I don't want to come down hard on this from a practical use standpoint. I'm okay exploring how we could modulate the use of it for ornamental usage. I was just searching online to see if there's some kind of heater you could add to those, or I'm sorry, timer that you could add to those outdoor mushroom heaters. Doesn't look like it. Maybe that's something for the long term that could be explored. I haven't seen that ever with my own eyes. I don't see it online, but maybe others could find something that we could recommend. If there was like a 60 or 90-minute timer, at least that would remind people that they got to keep turning it on. But again, I don't know if it exists. So not supportive of the permits, okay with exploring how to limit the ornamental use. Thanks.
I'm going to look at you. You just heard some consistency in comments around this. It doesn't sound like there is, at this time, just blanket support for permit requirement. And I think it might be best said to say, like, I don't think we need to send staff off on that now. You guys have plenty of work to be doing. This is probably not where your time needs to be spent. But what you've heard here is that we have concerns going forward. I think if you marry those comments along with what Sam said about some outreach to the restaurants, maybe that's our next step here, is to start talking about possible solutions. Again, for the behavior that we want to see. We don't care about the offset money. What we want is for them to be utilized efficiently, so that there is gas in the tank when Bill gets there to have dinner.
I'm a wimp. I need to be warm.
And I want you to be warm. And, and we all support that. That's, I think we all agree that we're supportive of that right now until, future time comes where there's really viable electric alternatives that should be in place. We'll see. Is that enough information for you to go off of how we would like energy spent on this? One, we would love to enlist some of the user groups to get some information from them. Two, we would like to make sure that the communication goes out that the city council is considering either some cost offsetting or regulation around this, and how do we best get there for the behavior that we want. And then moving forward from that, then maybe we can start talking about punitive or offset measures that allow it as an option for those that want to pay in. Does that make sense?
It does a little. I think, just to be clear, I think, just for the record, staff doesn't see these things as good or evil, right? I think we see them as a source of significant energy consumption. And, I think consistent with other things that we have associated with REMP, these are very visible, and we think a fairly significant contributor to, the contribution of outdoor energy uses to, to our climate impacts. So, I think the code that was passed early last year, I think, was acknowledging, very clear council direction on sort of climate action goals and what we wanted this to achieve. And I think we've got some administrative issues on the REMP thing, or on the heat tape topic, that I think we'll get a resolution on. But I do think that this is probably the most visible and most impactful sort of outdoor energy use that we have across our community. And so I think from staff's perspective, we see it this thing that causes us a little bit of grief as we're trying to sort of implement council desires around these topics. Certainly some outreach. I think the prohibition on ornamental stuff, we'll have to do some thinking about how to deal with that. I think there's some education around that. Perhaps a prohibition, heard that clearly. But I think from staff's perspective, again, this is the one thing that we see across town that seems pretty contrary, I think, to the rest of the things that we did with our energy code.
Question for you. In the memo under this, it talks about the energy usage of the mushroom heaters. It says one 50,000 BTU patio heater. Are each one of those a 50,000 BTU?
Approximately.
And so offsetting this would be a $37,000 offset for one heater at 100%. You're talking about places that have 4 or 5 of these, $100,000 of offset costs.
To clarify, that would be for a full 20-year offset.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not annual. Just
No,
offset.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I
Look
get
at
it.
the first number, it's PV, not money, right? We
Right.
want you to invest into your land and property.
But our restaurateurs who don't own their buildings and such are not going to invest, well, most of them are not going to invest $150,000 in that stuff. Anyway, I think you have mixed sentiment. You have a council that is wanting to move in the direction that you're going. I just don't think that we are there to support this right now tonight. We have a couple of outstanding questions. And again, we are bifurcating it a little bit between the usage of these heaters and the just running of these heaters, you know? So we see kind of splitting of hairs here. We understand that enforcement and regulation in that area is difficult. You've shared that with us already, so it would be my preference for us to give you the information that we've been able to provide tonight, and hope that you can come back to us with, you know, a plan, a course of plan that may get us to the end result. You know, things like this offset at 100%, that's the kind of thing that we'd want to signal to our community, not just a year lead time, but probably even more than that. I don't think we're in a hurry to support this tonight, because I think we still have a lot of outreach and work to do before we got to this level. I hope that's helpful. I know this is it's not a huge issue, but it's a sticky one, because it's hard to parse apart. Dennis?
The annual idea was to take that use of a heater and do it in a 1-year increment rather than a 20-year calculation, right? So the 37 becomes $1,600, based on a 50,000 BTU running for the run times that we have in the calculator. In the calculator, we have a 4-hour run time for commercial. That again would be what the intent would be, to offset that use seasonally or annually, based on our calculator that we currently have, but just on a lesser basis. So if you open your restaurant today, you want to heat today and throughout the summer and the winter, that annual mitigation would allow that.
And would that be, as Ward was talking about, per heater or per location?
Per heater. BTUs converted to watts times 20 years is how the REMP program works, and then offset those watts and or pay. So that what we were trying to find is a way to address the climate, stop the burning, or mitigate the burning. And that was where the annual conversation started for us.
Yeah. To acknowledge the fact that these are tenants
Add
that,
one more thing, please. I would like to entertain the possibility that the government would pay for any electrical upgrades that may be needed to go to electrification, and to incentivize electrification, and put that in the equation of the total cost of ownership of outdoor heating.
So that's the last question on the screen in front of you guys. Are there 2 other council members that would say yes, outdoor electric heaters should be incentivized?
Yes.
Or bring back more information about possibly incentivizing the outdoor electric heaters changeover?
Yes, on more information.
Yeah, more information.
All right, so we are supportive of that. Thank you for that, Ward. you give me more to think about with this annual permit at $1,600 per heater. I didn't see that as information in the packet, so I would like to keep thinking about that.
One comment on this incentivization strategy for commercial outdoor dining. I think we have to be realistic and practical that a space that is likely to be occupied by a restaurant that has an outdoor dining potential is going to use some form of heating over time. And so I almost wonder if we should require at least preparation or installation of electric outdoor heating. Otherwise, it's just going to go to the gas heaters over time. I know that's only something we can do on new buildings and new permits, but you know, charging someone a rent fee and not requiring it out there is a disincentive. So think about that as you're responding.
I think across the board, I think the availability of these propane heaters, even considering sort of an electric heater, like it's a fairly new dynamic. Like 10 years ago, there weren't mushroom heaters all over town heating up our outdoor patio spaces. And, you know, it's a new dynamic that I think we're addressing that I think particularly after COVID was mentioned. Like I think that restaurants came to clearly understand the value of those outdoor spaces in a new way. And so like I do think that this use of outdoor heating is a fairly new and intensifying dynamic as, again, most of our restaurants, their net leasable space is relatively small comparative to other restaurants. And so expansions out beyond that are very valuable things. And you know, the technology is now available and, you know, relatively inexpensive to bring these things on property. So I think this is, you know, it's a new dynamic that I think we're sort of responding to. And so that's interesting. Okay.
Is that enough information on this outdoor heater topic?
I think so.
All right.
I think so.
All right.
Right, this is a tough one, and you're definitely all have more information needs, so I just for clarity for the public, the current language will stand moving forward, that no decisions were made tonight, but a lot of information requests to come back to the council. And we'll start working on those. I'm going to prioritize some of the demolition allotment permit work ahead of this. Just for clarity. I know there are two different divisions of community development, but nevertheless, they both need quite a bit of support from the senior leadership to move forward. So just wanted to give you that heads up. If you think differently, let me know, but otherwise, I'm going to focus on the demo permit stuff with Ben as the first priority.
I see heads nodding.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you,
all.
guys.
Thank you.
We had a third item on our work session this evening, but seeing that it's 6:45, I'm going to ask that we reschedule that for another day. Because we have more to get to. I agree from Bill. You guys okay with that?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Ward. All right, with that, that's going to conclude our work session for this evening. But that gives me the opportunity to call to order a special meeting of the Aspen City Council for today, which is March 4th, 2024. Can we have a roll call for attendance?
I'll do that, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Doyle,
Yes.
Councilor Guth,
Yes.
Councilor Howenstein,
Yes.
Councilor Rose,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. The purpose of this special meeting is to go into executive session for conference with our city attorney regarding the city attorney review. Jim, do you need to read any citations there?
I would note, Your Honor, for the record, that under the charter, special meetings do require public comment if there's anyone available for public comment at this time. You may want to ask.
I'll go ahead and open that portion of the special meeting. If there's any members of the public that wish to address council on items not scheduled on this agenda, then please do so. I'm looking online as well as in room. I'm seeing none, so I'll bring it back to the council table.
Mr. Mayor, council has requested an opportunity to go into executive session pursuant to CRS Section 246424F personnel. The specific item to discussion is the city attorney review. Council goes into executive session. The executive session will be recorded, and the recording will be maintained by the clerk for a period of not less than 90 days. As usual, I believe the intent is to convene downstairs in the electric pass conference room. It will be handled through Teams with Mr. Howenstein participating remotely. The council will not return to these chambers for conclusion and adjournment of the meeting.
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Could we have a roll call vote for going into executive session, please?
Yes, Councilor Doyle,
Yes.
Councilor Guth,
Yes.
Councilor Howenstein,
Yes.
Councilor Rose.
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Thank you, as always, to GrassRoots. As it was just stated, we are concluding our meeting here now. We will go into executive session. We will adjourn from there, as we will not have any business after our executive session. Thank you guys so much. We will see you next week. Work sessions on Monday, regular meeting on Tuesday. Have a great evening.
Ward, I need a
CN2D.